The man who gives the most is always the one who gets hurt the deepest. The man who shows real loyalty, real consistency, real emotional presence. He ends up being the one she pushes away, disrespects, or quietly destroys without even realizing it. It sounds unfair, almost unbelievable, until you start paying attention to how modern relationship psychology has twisted emotional dynamics. Because today, the more a man treats a woman well, the more invisible he becomes. The more stable he is, the more she takes that stability for granted. And the more he proves his love, the easier it becomes for her to rewrite that love as weakness. There's something dark that happens inside many modern women without them consciously intending it. They crave intensity, unpredictability, emotional highs, and romantic dopamine spikes. But a good man doesn't give chaos, he gives safety. He gives understanding. He gives emotional oxygen instead of emotional fire. And when a woman has been conditioned by the modern dating landscape, constant attention online, endless validation, constant comparison, she loses the ability to feel excitement from what is stable. She becomes addicted to emotional stimulation. And a good man, the man who genuinely cares, becomes the emotional equivalent of silence in a world addicted to noise. Not because he's boring, but because she never learned how to appreciate peace. This is where the destruction begins. Slowly, quietly, subtly, she stops seeing his kindness as effort and starts seeing it as baseline. She stops noticing his empathy and begins comparing him to fantasies in her head. She stops valuing his presence because she knows it too well. She has never feared losing it. And when someone does not fear losing you, they will eventually mistreat you, even if you are the best thing in their life. That's the psychological trap many good men fall into, being dependable in a world that rewards detachment. There's a moment a man feels this shift. He gives her support after a long day, and she reacts with indifference. He surprises her with affection, and she treats it like routine. He tries to communicate, and she brushes him off like an inconvenience. Not because he did something wrong, but because his consistent love reshaped her expectations. She now believes he will always be there, no matter how she behaves, no matter how she speaks to him, no matter how little she gives back. That belief alone is enough to destroy any relationship. And the worst part? She often doesn't realize what she's doing until she has pushed him too far. Modern women aren't taught to self-reflect. They're taught to demand. They aren't taught to appreciate. They're taught to expect. They aren't taught emotional accountability. They're taught emotional entitlement. And in that mindset, the good man becomes the emotional punching bag, the one she vents on, unloads on, projects on because she believes he can handle it, because he always has, and because he never fights back. A man who treats a woman well becomes easy to hurt simply because he refuses to hurt her back. Over time, she starts resenting him for the very things she once admired. His patience becomes passive. His gentleness becomes unattractive. His loyalty becomes clingy. His emotional stability becomes predictable. This is what happens when someone confuses excitement with love, attention with value, and ease with weakness. And this is why many modern women destroy the men who treat them the best. They have been conditioned to feel alive only when they are chasing validation, not when they are receiving real affection. But beneath her behavior is something deeper: fear. Psychological fear of intimacy, fear of being seen, fear of being truly known. Because the man who treats her best is also the man who exposes her insecurities the most. His kindness makes her confront her own lack of emotional maturity. His stability reveals her instability. His consistency magnifies her inconsistency. And instead of rising to meet his standard, she tears him down to avoid facing her own reflection. Some men lose themselves trying to love a woman who doesn't know how to receive love. Others finally see the truth. You cannot save someone who is threatened by the very love they say they want. You cannot give peace to someone addicted to emotional chaos. And you cannot pour loyalty into someone who only values what they fear losing. The man who treats her the best is often the one she destroys first, because he is the easiest to break, the safest to hurt, and the least likely to walk away. The man who gives the most is also the one who feels the earliest shift in her emotional temperature. It doesn't happen in a single argument or a dramatic moment. It happens in the small signals a woman doesn't think twice about. Her tone becomes sharper. Her appreciation becomes rare. Her affection becomes conditional. And her presence becomes selective, showing up only when she needs comfort, validation, or emotional grounding. He feels it before he admits it. He knows something is changing, but he keeps giving, hoping his consistency can steady what her own instability keeps shaking. That hope is the slowest form of self-destruction. Modern women today live in a psychological climate built on attention inflation. With endless digital validation, microdopamine hits, and constant comparison, the emotional economy has shifted. The man who treats her the best becomes the emotional constant she no longer values. Stability loses its weight when she is surrounded by exaggerated fantasies. Safety becomes invisible when chaos is always one swipe away. Her mind becomes overstimulated, and the man providing real intimacy starts feeling insufficient. Not because he lacks something, but because her standards have risen beyond anything human. That's the tragedy of emotional detachment. The more secure he makes her feel, the more she takes him for granted. He becomes the emotional wall she leans on, the safe harbor she retreats to, the grounding presence she assumes will always be there. And the moment she believes she can't lose him, her instinct to protect the relationship disappears. She stops trying. She stops nurturing. She stops reciprocating. Her effort collapses into comfort, and comfort turns into entitlement. The psychological shift is brutal. Once she sees him as permanent, she unconsciously stops seeing him as valuable. And he feels this in her body language, in her silence, in how quickly she dismisses him when her emotional needs are temporarily satisfied. A good man makes a woman feel emotionally seen, but a modern woman who lacks self-awareness often interprets that feeling as power rather than partnership. She begins testing boundaries, pushing emotional limits, or projecting her frustrations onto him because she knows he won't leave. And when someone believes you are unbreakable, they stop being careful with your heart. His empathy becomes her venting space. His patience becomes her dumping ground. His loyalty becomes her excuse to withhold her own. This imbalance erodes the relationship from within, creating the psychological illusion that the one who gives most can withstand anything. But deep down, he's deteriorating. Quietly, privately, emotionally. Each dismissal chips away at his masculinity. Each indifferent response slowly suffocates his desire. Each moment she chooses excitement over him reinforces the belief that he is no longer seen as a man, but as an emotional utility. This is how true intimacy dies. Not through betrayal, but through slow, repeated disregard. And a woman rarely notices this shift until he reaches emotional burnout. By then, her destruction is already done. At the core of this dynamic lies a missing ingredient: emotional reciprocity. Modern women are often taught to evaluate partners based on what they receive, not what they give. They are encouraged to expect, demand, and elevate their standards, but not to reflect on whether they are contributing equally. Without mutual investment, she becomes a consumer of his love rather than a participant in it. And good men, because of their emotional resilience, are often the easiest targets for this imbalance. They continue carrying the relationship until the weight crushes them. If you've ever felt this shift, felt yourself fading in a relationship you were still giving everything to, write your truth below. If any part of this hit your reality, comment, "I've lived this." The man who gives the most eventually reaches a stage where he starts questioning himself instead of questioning her behavior. It's the psychological spiral good men fall into. When she begins pulling away, he assumes he must be the problem. He thinks maybe he isn't romantic enough, maybe he isn't interesting enough, maybe he isn't fulfilling her emotional needs the way he used to. But the truth is far more complicated than self-blame. What he's really facing is a woman who has become emotionally saturated by his consistency and emotionally numbed by her own entitlement. The more he tries to fix something he didn't break, the more invisible he becomes. And invisibility is the slowest way a man loses himself. There's a point where his kindness stops being a gift and becomes a background noise she no longer hears. He rearranges his schedule for her, and she barely notices. He supports her through her emotional storms, and she treats it as his obligation. He shows up every day with loyalty and presence, and she starts perceiving it as the bare minimum instead of the quiet form of devotion that it truly is. This psychological imbalance doesn't appear overnight. It builds over time as she becomes accustomed to receiving more than she gives, expecting more than she contributes, and demanding more than she understands. Modern women often mistake emotional security for lack of excitement. They mistake stability for weakness. And because many have grown up consuming narratives of romantic drama, unpredictable affection, and hyper-intense highs, they associate love with adrenaline rather than connection. So when a good man gives her calm, grounded intimacy, real intimacy, it feels unfamiliar, feels too safe. It lacks the psychological tension she subconsciously equates with passion. This is the emotional trap. She thinks she wants a man who treats her well, but she doesn't know how to feel alive in a relationship without chaos. As her internal restlessness grows, she begins comparing him to unrealistic fantasies. Not real men, not real relationships, but curated illusions. Highlight reels on social media, romantic scenes in movies, voices online telling her she deserves more, without ever explaining what more actually means. The good man becomes the benchmark she takes for granted while her imagination paints bigger stories he can never compete with. And this comparison poisons her perception without her realizing it. The destruction usually begins with emotional withdrawal. She becomes more reactive, less patient, more easily annoyed. She pulls away physically, then mentally, then fully. Her responses become shorter. Her appreciation disappears. Her affection turns into routine, then obligation, then silence. She begins treating him like an accessory in her life rather than the partner who built so much of her emotional stability. And he feels each stage deeply, even if he doesn't speak about it. A man never misses the moment she stops loving him the way she used to. His body feels it before his mind accepts it. This is when he tries harder. Good men usually do. He gives more affection, more effort, more reassurance, more emotional presence. Not because he's weak, but because he loves her. Because he still believes in the potential of the relationship. Because he hopes that if he nurtures her enough, she'll remember who he is and how much he has given. But instead of restoring the connection, his increased effort accelerates the imbalance. The more he gives, the less she respects him. The more patient he becomes, the more she pushes boundaries. The more understanding he shows, the more she devalues his emotional labor. It's not that she wants to hurt him. Most modern women don't consciously seek to destroy the man who treats them the best. The destruction happens because she has lost emotional discipline. She has developed an internal dependence on being pursued, validated, and emotionally stimulated. And when the good man gives her everything she asked for, she subconsciously creates conflict to feel something again. Not because she hates him, but because she can no longer feel excitement without chaos. It's emotional self-sabotage disguised as normal behavior. What makes this dynamic even more brutal is how silently it unfolds. There is no announcement that she is pulling away. No explanation that her expectations have changed. No clarity about what she needs. Just quiet emotional decay. She becomes colder while he becomes warmer. She becomes distant while he becomes present. She starts protecting her independence while he starts fighting for the connection. And eventually, he wakes up one day realizing he has exhausted himself trying to love someone who no longer sees him. And through all this, one truth becomes undeniable. The man who treats her the best is often destroyed not because he is wrong, but because she never learned how to receive steady, mature, grounded love. Without emotional awareness, even the greatest man becomes disposable to someone who is addicted to stimulation over intimacy. And that is how the cycle repeats, again and again, leaving good men drained and modern women confused about why they can't keep the love they claim they want. The destruction reaches its peak when she starts emotionally distancing herself while still keeping him close enough to benefit from his presence. It's the quiet manipulation that even she might not recognize. She stops giving affection, but still expects his loyalty. She stops nurturing the relationship, but still wants his emotional support. She withdraws intimacy, but demands understanding. She wraps her detachment in phrases like, "I just need time," or "I'm figuring myself out," while continuing to rely on him for the comfort and emotional grounding she cannot generate on her own. This psychological limbo keeps him hopeful, trapped, and increasingly drained. He starts sensing that love is no longer mutual, not from dramatic fights, but from the absence of warmth. She stops sharing parts of her life. She stops confiding in him. She doesn't realize the damage she's doing until the man she once depended on stops reacting. That's the moment everything shifts. The silence that used to scare her becomes the silence she created with her own hands. The man who once poured validation, affection, emotional safety, and endless patience into her finally reaches the point where nothing inside him responds anymore. And when that happens, modern women often interpret it as coldness, detachment, even cruelty, but they never trace it back to the years of emotional erosion they caused without thinking. They don't realize a man doesn't break loudly. He breaks quietly, layer by layer, until the bond collapses under weight she never even saw. It starts with the way she dismisses his efforts. A man can give generosity, stability, commitment, even emotional intelligence, but if she's conditioned to feel entitled rather than grateful, she interprets those things as baseline requirements instead of gifts. She believes attention is owed to her. She believes support is the default. She believes sacrifice is simply part of his role. This quiet entitlement is the first spark that destroys the man who treats her the best. Because no matter how strong a man is, the moment everything he gives becomes invisible, he starts to feel like he has no value in her world. Then comes the emotional imbalance, the psychological loop where she expects empathy but never gives it. She expects reassurance but offers none. She expects understanding but rarely pauses to see that he is drowning, too. This imbalance is deadly because men don't verbalize their needs the way women do. A man who feels unheard simply tries harder at first. He becomes more gentle, more patient, more giving, hoping it will stabilize the relationship. But modern women, conditioned by dopamine-driven culture and constant external validation, often interpret increased effort as weakness. Instead of appreciating it, they push harder. They test more. They demand more. And each demand chips away at the man's emotional identity. The moment he senses disrespect, the internal collapse begins. Body language changes first. His shoulders stay tense, his eyes lose warmth, his gestures grow minimal. He stops initiating affection because affection now feels like a task instead of an expression of love. He no longer shares his inner world because every time he did, she used it against him or dismissed it. The psychological space that once felt safe now feels hostile. When a man starts shrinking inside a relationship, he doesn't fight. He fades. Slowly, quietly, invisibly. And ironically, this is exactly when she panics. Only when his silence becomes real does she suddenly feel the loss of the man she took for granted. She realizes too late that the man who treats her the best is also the man who disappears the deepest when he can no longer endure the emotional imbalance. She realizes too late that the love she assumed was permanent was actually conditional on being treated with respect. She realizes too late that destruction didn't come from a single event, but from all the little moments where she dismissed his effort, questioned his loyalty, ignored his emotional needs, and assumed he would always stay because good men don't leave. But good men do leave, they just leave emotionally long before they walk away physically. And this is the truth many modern women don't want to face. You can't destroy a good man unless he loved you deeply. If he didn't care, your words wouldn't hurt him. If he didn't want a future with you, your behavior wouldn't drain him. If he didn't believe in the relationship, your indifference wouldn't break him. The man who treats her the best is usually the one she hurts the most because he's the one who gives her the power to hurt him. And once that damage reaches the point of no return, there is no apology, no promise, and no emotional plea that can pull him back. By the time she wants him to change, he already has, just not in the way she hoped. And so the ending feels cold, even cruel, but only because she never saw the years of erosion that led to it. A man's heart doesn't collapse overnight. It collapses after realizing he gave everything to someone who never understood the value of what she had until it was gone. If this message resonates with you, stay with the channel. There's more ahead. More clarity, more psychology, more truth about relationships that most people never say out loud. If you find value here, consider liking the video, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who needs this perspective too.